When I walk down the street in a big city, I find myself laughing at myself because my instinct is to nod and smile at just about everybody I pass in the street. And this is not because I'm some sort of extrovert or I'm a bit mad. It's because I'm so used to walking around in a small town where all the time I see people I know or people who know me. I'm so used to expecting that the people I meet in the street are people that I know. And so I'll nod and I'll smile. And I find myself doing that in a big city, and then I have to laugh at myself and stop myself almost. What would you say is the hardest thing about living in, or especially growing up in a small town or a small village? You might say it's lack of things to do. You might say it's poor Wi-Fi or not enough fast food restaurants or delivery options. I wonder though if the hardest thing about growing up in a small village or town is the feeling that everybody knows you. They know your business. And that's great when I'm doing something good or I've achieved something that I'm proud of, and everybody gets to hear about it and maybe congratulates me. But what about when I make a mistake or I do something embarrassing or even worse than just embarrassing? And then it can feel like everybody knows and everybody's speaking about it, and later on that everybody remembers. And I can move away. I can do all sorts of other things, and I can come back and still feel that that's who people see, the person who did that. In a book that's called Luke, in this collection of books that we come back to time and time again called the Bible, Luke, the writer, tells about a Jewish teacher from a small town, a man called Jesus of Nazareth. A man who, over around about 3 years in the first century, in a country called Israel, turned history upside down. As Luke describes the life and death and later the resurrection of this man, at the start of his story he talks about how Jesus gets a bit of a reputation. And he tells a story of a man called Simon who invites this young Jewish teacher to dinner. We're told that this Simon was a Pharisee. Now, in the Jesus stories, you might have got the idea that Jesus is a hero and that he also saw all sorts of enemies, and that the Pharisees are the enemies. That's it's just a misconception, because the Pharisees weren't all the same. In fact, Jesus may well have had a lot of sympathy for the Pharisees. The Pharisees weren't an official group, they were a pressure group. They were an opinion group within the Jewish faith about how they should live out their faith. In particular, they felt that everybody was getting involved too much in the local cultures like the Greek and the Roman culture and forgetting who they were, Jewish people, and all the things that God had given them to do. And so they gave a focus much more on remembering all the commands God had made, and in actual fact they added lots of extra commands on as well. In general, though they are, lots of them, it seems, suspicious of Jesus, of the kind of things he's doing and saying. So maybe Simon invited Jesus to dinner to find out for himself. In those days, inviting someone to a meal like that for someone like Simon was actually quite a public affair. The windows were left open so people could see and hear what was going on. No one in that culture did things in private anyway. Luke tells us, though, that this dinner was different because a woman enters the house. Now that would be a bit more unusual. It wasn't unusual for people to come in and out, but it would have been unusual for a woman, because these kind of things were mainly for men. And people could come and watch, but they didn't often come and join. We're also told that this woman has a reputation for living a sinful life. Sin is a word these stories use for missing the mark, for failing to live the kind of life God gave you. Lots of people will tell you what they think this woman has done. That's all very well, but it doesn't tell us anything in here. And perhaps our assumptions are sometimes tell us more about us than about what's actually in here. This woman doesn't say anything. What she does, her actions, are shocking. Shocking to us, shocking in that culture. First of all, she goes to Jesus' feet. He's reclining, as would be normally done, to eat. And she's so moved that she's crying, overflowing with tears, so much so that her tears fall on his feet and wet them. Perhaps because his feet are getting wet, she then cleans them, because it turns out she wants to put oil on them, and she uses her hair, which means she has to unbind it, which Jewish women did not do in public, only for their husbands, or sometimes it was part of mourning. This is scandalous. This is shocking. And then she kisses his feet, and then she covers them with expensive perfume oil. Normally that's what you did for someone's head and their hair, but a slave was the one who got to look after your feet. This is all really unusual and uncomfortable for those watching. Simon is shocked, and we get to know what he's thinking. Luke writes that he thinks to himself, he speaks to himself. Nothing in here is here by accident. You see, this would be a bit of a little signal, a sign that something's not right for any Jewish listener. Because Jewish life in the ancient world was lived in community, in the family, in the tribe, in the marketplace. Decisions, everything about your life was done with other people. You thought out loud, you thought with others, you shared your life and your decisions with everyone else. In fact, it was a strange and in fact a suspicious person who would think or talk to themselves. Usually somebody who's plotting something. What Simon is thinking is that this Jesus character can't be the prophet everyone's talking about. A prophet was someone with insight from God. And if he was a prophet, Jesus would know things like who this woman was, what she'd done, what kind of person she was, her past. And he'd know that presumably the right thing to do would be to keep well clear. Jesus is the one who actually speaks out loud. And he knows what Simon is thinking, proving already that he does have the kind of insight that Simon doesn't think he has. Jesus tells a wee story. It's called a parable. Jesus kind of invented them. Stories that illustrate a truth or something else that's going on. He tells a story about a moneylender and about two people who owe money to the moneylender. And then that the moneylender cancels their debts. Jesus asks which one of them will feel more love. For reference, a denarius, which is mentioned in the story, was worth 1 day's wages. So there's a big difference. Now, it's really easy. I might be tempted, and I did this the first time I've ever heard this story, to concentrate on the amounts and to think about which person deserved the most. But a small detail that I missed the first times that I read the story and heard the story is that neither of the people can pay back the debts. It's not a parable about who was foolish enough to get into debt. It's not a story about who can pay back the debt or not. The moneylender decides to cancel their debts, the debts that neither of them could pay. The cancelling, the forgiving of these debts is a gift. And so Jesus' question isn't about who deserves. Jesus' question is about who responds, and who responds with the most love. And Simon grudgingly answers, well, the one who was forgiven the most. Then Jesus starts to talk to Simon about the woman. But before he does that, Jesus turns to look at the woman who's standing there. And I presume Simon then has to turn and look at her too. And only then does Jesus ask his question. And his question is, do you see this woman? And we might jump to his point, but that question hangs there. Simon, do you see this woman? I think Jesus is asking a deeper question. Not just to Simon, but to those of us listening. Do you see this woman? Do you see who she is? Who she can be, who she's made to be, or do you see who she was and what she did? It's been said before that Jesus of Nazareth didn't spend time with lepers, tax collectors, and prostitutes. And anyone who argues and say, but there's lots of stories like that, have to look again and see that Jesus seemed to see who God had made, not what the person had done. Jesus asks Simon, do you see this woman? And then Jesus goes on to list all the ways that Simon has failed to be the ideal host. He's failed to offer any water to wash Jesus' feet. He's failed to offer a kiss of welcome. He's failed to offer to put oil on his head, which is all the normal things that Jewish hospitality meant in the first century. Simon's been the one suggesting that this woman's actions are scandalous, when in actual the real scandal has been how poor a host Simon has been. Jesus goes on to say that all this woman has done is to show love, an overwhelming love response to the fact that she puts her faith in having been forgiven. It seems that she appreciates what Jesus' message so far has been all about, that this God story is far less about judgment and about behaviour, and instead it's far more about love and acceptance and forgiveness and mercy and grace. It's about response to who God is, what God is doing. Do you see this woman? She doesn't show love to be forgiven. She overflows with love because she has been forgiven. This is what it looks like to put your trust, to put your faith in a God who has dealt with everything that might get in the way. And so Jesus can say, go in peace, that Hebrew word shalom, wholeness. Simon's problem, I think, is that he assumed that a person is defined by their past. But this woman's faith, her trust is that there is nothing in our past that defines us, that defines who we are today and who we can be, being the person we were made to be. All our sins are cancelled, are forgiven by this God of generous love. And all that's left is how we respond. And when I walk down the street of the small town or the big city, all that matters is what God sees.